welcome to Hard NOC Life for the 300th or so time. It's 10 years ago today, or in a couple of days. By the time you see this on YouTube or listen to this on your podcast feed, it will be exactly 10 years from the very first Hard NOC Life that we did when it used to be a Google Hangout back in 2013. I am joined by some familiar faces to the Hard NOC family. Jason Sperber, one of the OG Nerds of Color, all the way from Los Angeles, California. And representing the Bay Area, we have Lauren Lola. And welcome back, Dominic Ma.
Also somewhat representing the Bay Area. Hello, everyone.
Yes. Well, you're both Bay Area. That's why I lumped you two together.
Oh yeah. Yeah, right on.
So we may have some special guests stop by or not, but we just wanted to gather. The podcast has been off the air for some time, but couldn't let this momentous day pass without convening some old friends to at least reminisce over the last 10 years and what the Nerds of Color means. We're just going to navel gaze for the next hour or so is what I'm saying. It's like, we don't need to talk about all the shit that's happening in the world. Although R.I.P. Arlene Sorkin, that was a bit of a gut punch. The voice of Harley Quinn and the inspiration of Harley Quinn passed away today, or when you're listening to this a couple days ago. But yeah, so I'll just throw it out there. Jason, Dominic, Lauren, thank you for being here and stroking my ego. Because I shared a couple weeks ago the very first post that I wrote on the Nerds of Color after the share of Balfi's Star Tribune essay that kind of inspired the name of the podcast and the name of the site. The very first post I wrote back in August of 2013 was basically like, thank you to all my Facebook friends for coming and reading this website. But I'll start with you, Jason, since you have some keen insight into the origins of this website, but also I have to say, you're one of the OG internet people that I know, who we've become friends over the internet, and you used to run a site called Rice Daddies, which I think was one of the ancestors of the Nerds of Color. So talk about coming from the internet space more than a decade ago, and then how you and I kind of like batted this idea around in your previous home's kitchen.
Yeah, so like my first daughter was born in fall of 2004, and I was a liberal Asian American stay-at-home dad in Bakersfield, California, feeling very out of place with no community. And so I had started following a lot of mom and dad bloggers of color, a lot of Asian American parent bloggers, and thought, okay, why don't I try to write something? And so I started a blog called Daddy in a Strange Land, using Apple's long departed blogging platform, because I didn't know HTML. And I started meeting a bunch of people and talked to, I guess at that point I already knew you, Keith, from Secret Identities, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And so, I started talking to like a handful of Asian American dad bloggers I knew, like Oliver Wang, and we were like, why don't we start a group blog? And so I basically emailed every Asian American dad on the internet that I knew, including you, and said, why don't we do this?
Or dad to be, because I think the first post I wrote for you guys, I wasn't even a dad yet. I was going to be a dad. Yeah.
So, it was right in the middle of this boom of, first person online essayists writing about, parenting, a lot of Gen X people. It was before influencers, before, it was all about sponsorships, and we were just writing personal essays and building community.
Hold that thought while we swing to our sponsors right now. No, I'm just kidding. We don't really have sponsors.
And so
none that still exists from 2013 anyway.
Oh, for sure.
They might have been bought by somebody at this point.
Yeah, so that lasted for a while. And a lot of my friends, now 20 years later, are people that I met through parent blogging. A lot of people writing about the intersection of race and parenting. And one of them was you, Keith. And in November 2011, you were on a business trip and to California, and you came over and we're having dinner. And I remember you brought, I think it was like superhero Legos or Star Wars Legos for my kids. And yeah, November
2011, and you posted on Facebook that I had stopped by the same week a couple other of your friends on the internet had stopped by. And what makes this visit so interesting is not just the first time I ever, I think, visited you in person, or not. That's not true, because we met a couple years earlier at events for Secret Identities. But first time I'd been to your house, first time I'd been to Bakersfield, but it was that time in November 2011 that I think I told you, like, I was inspired by Rice Daddies and thought, now that we were a year out from the second book, and I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do after that. I don't think there's going to be another book after Shattered, but I want to continue being in this space, because like being part of Secret Identities is what kind of thrust me into like the internet space, right? Because I just before Secret Identities, I just worked at Diamond Comics, and I was a nobody. But then I met Jeff Yang and did Secret Identities, and then now people who outside of like my local area knew who I was. And so I was like, I wanted to continue doing something like this, and we kind of batted around the idea of let's do something similar, but we talk about nerd shit. And we were inspired, of course, by, as you see in one of the first crude Hard NOC Life logos that Jason threw together was Troy and Abed from Community.
Oh, at that point, is this a scene from Community?
That is a scene from Community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was the original idea for the name of the site that night when we were just spitballing. And we were talking about who else did we know that could do it. And then fast forward 2 years, and you emailed and said, hey, we're going to do it. Who else do you know? And so again, just like with Rice Daddies, I just come through my Facebook friends and emailed everybody I knew, all so just like you, like all of the original writers were, friends of ours. And, so like Shawn and Julie. And
right. Sean Taylor, Julie Kang, like we and hopefully, invite went out. Hopefully some people will stop by, and we've had so many people pass through and go on to great, bigger and better careers. For example, shout out to Valerie Complex, who one of her first writing gigs was with us, and she went on to work for Deadline and be one of the most respected people in the movie critic industry. I want to actually swing it to Dominic and Lauren, because this was the origin. And Dominic, you and I had met very close to the beginnings of the Nerds of Color, because you had previously written for Yum Yum F, and you actually came on. You were one of the early Hard NOC Life guests back in 2013, 2014, because we did a whole podcast episode about who is the nerdiest Asian American actor, because we were, at the time, it was so few Asian American roles and even fewer Asian American actors who starred. And I think our criteria was they had to be in a superhero property, fantasy property. It's like a sword and sandals fantasy
superhero,
property.
A fantasy, and a space opera.
Yeah, something with Star in the title.
Yeah.
Trek or Wars. And I think we even used Stargate at the time, because I think I voted for Jason Momoa.
Yeah, and at the time we were angling for it to be Jessica Henwick, although we end up by some technicality by The Rock, which are both fine answers. But I didn't expect to end up on The Rock, but that's fine.
Was it The Rock? I thought it was Jason Momoa. Jason Momoa didn't win that? We should go back.
Jason Momoa barely existed at the time.
No, because he had just been cast as Aquaman. I think that's what it was. He had just been cast as Aquaman. He hadn't been Aquaman yet, but he had Stargate.
This is the problem of many years passing. Or Jason Momoa timeline gets a little confused. But I remember, if we're talking 2012, 2013-ish, it was a significant time in my life. I was moving back from the LA area to the Bay Area. Also, I believe the first Avengers came out in 2012, right? So that was kind of a
the first Avengers movie. The first
Avengers movie.
Captain America, the first Avenger came out in 2011.
Not the first, not the movie with the first Avengers in the title. Anyway, so I was going through all this family stuff, getting back into the Bay Area. And as you mentioned, I was writing a lot for Yum Yum F, UFN, my family at the time. Lauren also was. That site is no longer with us, but it, was involved with Justin and Lynn and a lot of the Lodestone Theater people and that stuff. And we were kind of among their pop culture specialty wing. And then we fell into doing the podcasts with you. And I just so many things have changed in our space of nerdy diversity stuff in that time, in that last 10 years. I mean,
for sure. Yeah. I mean, the need for the nerds of color, not that we don't need the nerds of color anymore, but it's like, I mean, and this is totally not shade, but even the trajectory of like the type of writing that you see on the nerds of color has evolved, right? It used to be, as Jason mentioned, a lot of academic-y pieces, a lot of like think pieces around like race and representation, and now we interview celebrities. It's like that's kind of with like almost no mention of like diversity.
Gonna continue to do all those things towards the 20th anniversary, like the think pieces.
we'll just be Entertainment Tonight in 2023. Lauren, I'm glad that
also because I thought this was a drop-in out hangout thing. I'm gonna go get a protein shake and
go in and out. Go in and out. This is totally.
I'll be right back.
Lauren, Dominic mentioned your involvement with Yum Yum F, but also we were tangentially connected through Cam, through Mixed Asian Media, previously Hop and Bag. So like talk about how you came to be part of the Nerds of Color family.
Right. So bouncing off of what Dominic was saying, Yum Yum F was suddenly closed at the end of 2018. It was very sudden, actually. Like, we were notified maybe a week or so before that it was going to be shutting down because their Phil, who was running a website at the time, was like involved with so many different projects at different stages that it just became too much to also be running the website. So it was shut down. 2019 started, and I'm like, where do I go from here? And even though I had just started working for Cam at the time, and I was doing interviews for our website as well, I was also like looking for something equivalent kind of to Yum Yum F. And I already knew about the Nerds of Color from maybe a year or two before. I think I first became aware of the Nerds of Color in 2017, I want to say, because that's when the Rally for Rose happened at San Diego Comic-Con. And then I became aware of them even more so in 2018 because Dominic had already been writing for y'all. So then like 6 months passed, and then I'm like chatting with Dominic saying like, hey, I'm thinking about joining the Nerds of Color. And so I was pitching an idea to him. We were going back and forth until I finally got in contact with you, Keith, and just kind of took off from there. And that was in June 2019 is when I joined.
So was that before? I mean, I remember meeting you at the Cam offices. I was like visiting Momo Chang, who was previously at Cam. And I feel like we met. But was that before? That was before you joined the Nerds of Color, then, right?
That was before I joined.
Yeah, you were still like, I think you were still writing for Happy Mag, and because I think I.
So I hadn't joined Happy Mag yet.
Oh no. Okay.
No.
Again, as Dominic said, like time is so blurry.
No, I remember that period. I remember chatting with you around that period, Lauren. And by the way, in the world of like freelance writers, it's not like you stop and start your careers at a place. So we can use this, like, I haven't written anything for Nerds of Color in a while, but I'm not saying like I.
Yeah, for sure. Right. And it's, and this is no one's job. I mean, let's be real. But yeah, so I mean, it's hard to like fathom, honestly. I am wearing the throwback Nerds of Color shirt, by the way. I may make these shirts available on our TeePublic store again, because this was the original logo. It hasn't been the logo in a while. But yeah, it's hard to everyone keeps talking about like these like past websites, these websites that have gone the way of the dodo, and just note to self, give Lauren more than a week's notice when I shut the Nerds of Color down. So I'm kidding. I'm not shutting Nerds of Color down yet, but I will. Well, I mean, it's here's the thing though, right? Like, I didn't imagine when I was sitting in Jason's kitchen 12 years ago that I'd still be doing this 10 years later. I'll tell you that right now. I didn't think that, I mean, like, to Dominic's point, not only has, like, you know, calling for representation evolved in like the way we talk about pop culture, but like the internet has changed in 12 years, right? Like,
sorry,
you know, like
mic problems.
Jason was using the term blog. Like, no one knows what the fuck a blog is anymore. Like, what's a blog? Nobody blogs. It's we've yet to join
Blogs
TikTok.
were pure,
that's
man.
like the what's that?
Blogs were in like a pure self-expression on the internet,
Sure.
period. Which
No, exactly. This is what I'm
weird.
saying. But the internet is no longer in that pure space.
We're waiting for you to start a TikTok channel where you dance to sci-fi soundtracks.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. That's probably why we'll shut down the next year or two, because I don't know. I can't keep up with Gen Z. Gen Alpha now is like kicking my ass. So, but I mean, I'm joking, but like, let's talk about how pop culture has changed since 2013, because, you know, like, as Lauren said, some of the things that made the Nerds of Color prominent were the Rally for Rose, was Asian American Iron Fist, whitewash out, like these kinds of movements or hashtags or whatever, you know, that actually, I'm not saying we did it, but it did lead to some real change in the industry, right? Like,
and it's not just in, you know, the nerd space or the geek space or what have you. I mean, as a parent, you know, I have a 18-year-old and a 14-year-old, and, you know, we'll be listening to like my eldest's Spotify playlists, and like, you know, I just am amazed. Like, every fifth song is by an Asian American or Asian diasporic artist, you know, and they think nothing of it, you know, and so it's just a different world.
100%. I mean, one of the original kind of thematic gimmicks that we did at the Nerds of Color, we had a whole Star Trek week. I think, maybe Into Darkness was coming out or something was coming out. So we were like, hey, there are a bunch of Trekkies on the site, so let's like just write think pieces about what it means to be a person of color who loves Star Trek and what Star Trek means. And, you know, and like most of the articles was about Captain Sisko or Uhura or George Takei, and that was, you know, it's pretty much the extent of like representation in Star Trek, right? Or Jason's very
all my mixed race stuff,
right? About being mixed race and Spock.
We used to do this thing. You guys, I don't know if either of you remember this. We used to do this thing where every new writer would write an origin story of becoming a nerd of color.
And yours was
and mine was all about Spock.
Cool.
But now, like, not only is there like so much Star Trek content, it's like more diverse than ever, right? Like, so you have shows with black leads and Asian characters, and it's like, it's almost too much to keep track of. I admit it has fallen off my pop culture radar just because there's just too much, right?
Yeah.
But again, that's a lot of
something that's decisively happened in the last 10 years. It definitely became too much to keep track of, for better and for worse. Can we all agree?
Too much. Yes.
There were only like 100 shows on, and now there's like 100,000 of them. And just by virtue of numbers, that's going to increase the representation of all groups. So that's one kind of, in an ideal world, right?
I mean, the MCU was nascent in 2013 when we first started talking about pop culture. It was like Dom said, it was just the Avengers.
Yeah, and now we didn't know that first Avengers movie was gonna work. That was an open question at the time. Right. Now it's settled deal now, and so we lived through the
now we've gone
ascendancy of the Marvel.
And we're not even in the ascendant. Like, we're kind of in the decline now, right? Because now people are talking about how, like, did Marvel fall off? And
we were there. Whatever happened, we were there.
We were there, and you know, it's funny that like Dominic and I had a podcast episode about how, you know, everything that we wrote about in regards to Asian American Iron Fist, that's basically what they did with Shang-Chi. Like, the Shang-Chi movie that came out a couple years ago was everything we called for an Asian American Iron Fist, right? It was like that story, essentially. They just kind of like grafted it on top of Shang-Chi. So, I mean, this is what. So I guess what I'm saying is that, like, mission accomplished.
Well, taking that as a case study of a discourse that nerds of color really got involved in and really, ended up reflecting in some of the stuff that actually came out. Sorry, I'm speaking broadly, but oh wow, is that Shawn Taylor? That would be awesome.
Shawn.
There he is. We were wondering. Couldn't have a Nerds of Color reunion without Shawn Taylor.
Not say for sure until the technical connection gets said. Oh, hey, Shawn, how are you?
What's up? I'm having really bad trouble with this thing. Let me try this again.
Oh, you seem great. Oh, there he went. Just like that.
Yeah, go on.
Hopefully Shawn comes back in a minute, but when you have like so much content, like, oh, that's not what we're talking about. We were talking about the Iron Fist, and it wasn't just Shang-Chi. Like, I think in the 10 years since, we've had Into the Badlands, we've had Warrior on HBO Max, we've had the rebooted Kung Fu show on the CW. Like, and not to speak, let's not forget about like the whole Crazy Rich Asians of it all. Like Asian Americans as like leads, as the hero, as box office draws, like as Jason kind of alluded to earlier. These were things that were unfathomable, not only when we were children, but when we launched this fucking site.
Yeah.
We did not think several years later that there'd be a John Chu directed, Henry Golding, Constance Wu led, big budget, blockbuster film that then would propel other films in its wake, like Oscar-winning films with Michelle Yeoh and Ke Huy Quan, and shows like American Born Chinese. Like, these things were unfathomable when we launched the Nerds of Color. And not to speak of other minority groups. It's not just
caveat interjecting. We're just talking about the Asian American stuff there, but it's a good, it's a good example of how much has changed. I swear, just in the last 5 years, the Asian American visibility thing, especially with how, like, I think as recently as 10 years ago, like Asian dudes in an American TV show, there was like still just like one or two things they were, and that has definitely branched out just in the last 10 years. So again, it's interesting. Change. Yeah. I'm sorry. I keep.
No. I mean, I think like 10 years ago, aside from, I mean, one of the reasons Troy and Abed was kind of the patron saints of the Nerds of Color 10 years ago was that, Community was the only place that you had two characters of color who were like fully nerds too, right? Like, that was the thing about Donald Glover and Danny Pudi's characters, is that they weren't just people of color, but they were like super nerdy into pop culture, referencing Star Trek and sci-fi, Doctor Who, all that stuff, like within the confines of the show. And that was in contrast to someone like Raj on The Big Bang Theory, who was a similar nerd, but then fulfilled a lot more stereotypes than perhaps Troy and Abed did, right? Like, the humors of Community and Big Bang Theory are very different, of course, but but now you can point to, like, again, the black nerd has become almost its own stereotype by 2023, where it's like, now let's have different types of black nerd characters that aren't just the IT guy or whatever, right? So like, I think it's again, like, you see how things evolve in the last 10 years. And and again, not to speak of just Asian American groups, this summer we're coming off last week when Blue Beetle, as soft of an opening as it was, at least it was the #1 movie in the country for a week, and it had the first Mexican American superhero lead. And there was a lot of press about it being the first Latino superhero. I'm like, did you guys forget that Across the Spider-Verse came out this summer? And then there was a string in the middle of the summer.
And then The Flash is also half Latin now, or actually he's half Spanish.
Yeah, I don't know if it is. Yeah, that's the less we say about Ezra Miller, the better. But like,
but speaking of a few things about The Flash, but I'll get.
Yeah, we'll get there. Later, but there was a string. Speaking of The Flash, there was a string of movies in the summer where you had Sasha Calle playing Supergirl on The Flash. The following week, it was the Transformers led by Anthony Ramos, and then right after that there was another superhero movie. Now I'm blanking on it, but of course we also had Miles Morales as Spider-Man. And so, like, what came out after The Flash? There was another movie that was like another Latin lead, but now I'm blanking on what movies came out this summer. It doesn't matter. But yeah, so like, again, that's something was not in the cards a decade ago. So Lauren, what are your thoughts on the evolution of pop culture in the last 10 years?
It's been a sight to see. It's funny, when I was in college, and this was around 10 years ago, I remember like I was taking college courses about how there wasn't a lot of representation in the media across the gender spectrum, across racial spectrum, across LGBTQ spectrum, and so on. And so it kind of felt like everyone else in the industry was maybe taking this class at the same time, because that's when I started seeing a shift in the forms of shows like Fresh Off the Boat and what have you coming out. So it's just interesting to see how like that little tidal wave that began back then has kind of amassed into where we are now. And while I know you were only joking earlier, Keith, about how like, oh, we don't need the color anymore. No, I can still see a lot of ways that we can improve. I mean, the fact that we've been on 2 strikes for God knows how long at this point shows that, yeah, we're not where we want to be yet. If people aren't even getting paid properly to do the work that needs to be done to get to where we are now.
Which is one of the reasons we originally went on hiatus, is because like we, you know, I mean, I know that there was at the time there was some controversy about like what can you cover, can you not cover, but I think to your point, like, you know, this content farm has become like factory farming, and where people are just being exploited and not, you know, because like it started, you know, the controversy really before the writers and actors went on strike was Marvel and other studios pushing their VFX artists to the brink, and you know, like everyone was clowning, you know, all the bad VFX, but like that's not the VFX artist's fault when they're being forced to work ungodly hours and you know, meet deadlines, arbitrary deadlines that are just, you know, the decree of some corporate executive that wants to meet a bottom line and not, you know, thinking about how. And I think in the last couple of weeks, the Marvel VFX artists have voted to unionize. So, I mean, these kinds of like, yeah, you're absolutely right, Lauren. Like these kinds of issues are still going to be a problem if they're not addressed. And just because, and I think one thing that I've kind of come to understand over the last 10 years is just like representation alone isn't enough. Like just because you get to see yourself on screen, you know, like there, I mean, it just so shows how bad it was maybe before that, like that was a victory in and of itself, but that's not the end goal. And it can't be. It can't just be like, hey, you know, we get to see faces like ours on screen and then that's it. It's those stories, those faces have to now tell stories that reflect real lived experiences of those faces and not just kind of like painted window dressing. And that was, you know, and for what it's worth, that was part of the debate when the Nerds of Color launched too, is that like, are we, you know, cheering for representation's sake, or do we really want like real change in pop culture? Jason, you were there at the beginning. What do you think?
Well, I mean, it was interesting. I mean, I remember when, I mean, not to tell tales out of school, but
well, we don't need to name names.
No, I'm not going to name names, but I mean, just like we had like a Facebook back channel group where we were supposed to be talking about like, you know, what content can we come up with, and it like turned into this like battle between like factions over like, you know, what, you know, where we stood and, you know, how we were going to cover things. I mean, like everybody's saying, like we still have work to do. I mean, I wanted to expand it beyond just you know, film and TV, but because you know, we used to cover I mean, we still do cover comics and stuff, but you know, we used to cover a lot more literature.
Yeah, we had a lot more well-read people on the site.
Well, I mean, you let me spearhead a lit week in the first year. That was really cool because we had like a whole bunch of you know, working authors as contributors who have, you know, who have gone on to, you know, do amazing things like, you know, Daniel Older, and you know, we
David Walker, Willie DeMarisha,
right?
like we were all contributors back in the early days.
And so, you know, over the last 10 years, we keep having the same conversation over and over again in publishing, where I mean, like I go into the young adult section, and especially like, you know, there's an entire young adult sci-fi fantasy section separate from all the other young adult sections. And I go in there with my daughter to buy books, and, you know, every other book is, you know, about people of color or gender nonconforming people or sexual minorities. I mean, that was not the case when we launched. But at the same time, we're still having those debates over, contraction in the publishing industry and who's getting paid what and whose work is getting promoted and put on bookstore shelves. And so, it's like the 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing. So like Lauren was saying, there is still, a need for places where this discourse can be had.
Well, and I think that's where I don't want to say struggling, but like when we launched the Nerds of Color, as you said, blogs were a place people went to read long form journalism and think pieces. And I feel like the internet is no longer really a place where you go to read long form journalistic think pieces, because content on the internet is, as you jokingly said, TikTok, which is very like short, to the point, memeified kind of content. That's how people, like, the most popular movie critics are like these 2-minute summaries on TikTok, and no one's watching Siskel and Ebert anymore, right? Like, it's these influencers on TikTok, or I mean, the place formerly known as Twitter. Like, that is where a lot of discourse happens now, or it did happen. And I don't know what kind of discourse happens on Twitter anymore. But like the way we engage with content on the internet, like this kind of discourse on the internet, has evolved away from going to a website and reading someone's blog about it. So, I mean, this is going to be broadcast on YouTube. We have dabbled in, outside of like the celebrity interview, we've dabbled in like YouTube content. But like, I guess the question I'm asking is, what does the future of the Nerds of Color look like? Should we continue writing long form think pieces? Should we engage in more video content? Should I start dancing on TikTok? Like, what is the future of NOC content?
Are those the choices?
Like, no, I guess
I know. But I think it's like Dom is alluding to, that it's a false choice or a false dichotomy. It doesn't have to be one or the other. You look at, TikTok and see, yes, there's a lot of promotion. Yes, there's a lot of mindless stuff, but there's also, a lot of knowledge sharing and teaching and stuff that's being done in different ways, and organizing. I wish Shawn would be able to get back on, because, his work on fandom activism, which, he used our Nerds of Color to start getting the germs of that work out, and he's gone on to do more in different venues. But just that idea, we don't have to be. There's nothing saying that you have to be a ponderous academic think piece site or a light review or paid sponsorship. Yay, we love this. Go see it. And especially when you're talking about, when you go beyond the idea that we are covering media products and get into like what Shawn does with looking at fandom and activism. And I've had a really interesting journey over the last few years as a parent, seeing, I used to joke, we used to have a section on the site about parenting and, how do we turn our kids into nerds, and, jokes like that. And I would always say like, my kid, she doesn't want to watch this stuff. She doesn't, and somehow in the last 5 years, I stopped having to, suggest or push. And she's the one who, I've gone to Doctor Who fan conventions with her. She, is a giant, when she started getting into the MCU, I said, hey, why don't we watch Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. from the beginning? And that became her thing, and through that, she met other fans her age.
And she also met Chloe Bennett, right? Didn't that blow her mind?
Mm-hmm. And then she got into the, making fan vids on Instagram, where everything's really quick cut and it's very short, and they're like pairing, Taylor Swift or the other pop music they like to, quick cut bits that explore characters and themes. And
so can your kid run the Nerds of Color TikTok? Is that what you're proposing? Is that what's happening?
Well, actually, I mean, we were actually, when I said I was doing this today, we were joking about that.
Yeah. Hey, look.
I mean,
the main reason I'm not on TikTok or post any Instagram reels or anything like that, I just don't know how. I'm not equipped. I'm too old. I'm too old, damn it. I refuse to learn new blogging platforms. That's where we
But like, if you look at look at the sites that came up with us and who's doing, like, there were Black nerd sites that, were, like Black, what am I thinking? Like Black Girl
Problems. Well, Black Girl Nerd. Talk about Black.
Well, and Black Nerd Problem. There were some, some sites that, like, they went on and they had,
absolutely. I mean, huge influence
collections.
Yeah.
And then ones that, turned into just review sites. But, like, when I look on the web now and see something that sort of reflects my original ideas of what we were trying to do, I would say something like the Mary Sue, where, they cover stuff and they'll cover properties, but they also invite writers to, break stuff down and ask questions and, do that kind of, especially along lines of race and gender and sexuality. And, to have those discussions that fans are having in other spaces. I mean, because, we all came to this as fans, and the idea that we criticize because we care,
Yeah.
And so, I think there is room for other stuff, for other ways of tackling this, and for, even figuring out how to engage younger voices and younger fans.
Because that's what, they do say, the children are our future. Teach them well, let them lead the way. Show them all the beauty we possess inside. Give them a sense of pride to make it easier. Let the children's laughter. I'm going to keep going if no one cuts me off, by the way.
Well, that's like a litmus test. Like, if everyone watching this gets that reference,
exactly.
then we're too old.
If you get my joke, we don't want you. We're trying to go after the young.
Lauren, cut him off. He'll get to the chorus.
So with that said, now that
cracker, sorry.
We're in 2023.
But I'm with you.
What is everyone nerding out about right now? Since at the end of the day, we're still a nerd site, and we're a nerd site because as Jason mentioned, we love this shit, and I haven't been on in a while, so I haven't gotten to talk about some. I mentioned Blue Beetle earlier. I mentioned a couple of the projects that have been out over the last couple of weeks. What's everyone geeking on right now? Lauren, let's start with you. What are you excited about at the moment?
I mean, what do I talk about that's not being struck right now? Is the question.
That's okay. I mean, we can talk about things. We know, and I don't think anyone here is a SAG-AFTRA or WGA member. So, and I think there is an exception for journalistic content around.
Yeah, what about aspiring WGA members?
Well, that's true. Well, that's where it gets tricky. That is definitely where it gets tricky. Is there anything? Well, you speaking of aspiring writers, Lauren, you have some writing and comic book content that you're a part of recently.
Yeah. I guess I could talk about that. I mean, it's not the same as the traditional nerd popping, but it's nerd-ish.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mentioned this, I think, at the top of the year when I was on Hard NOC Life, is that, I'm a writer for a graphic novel that's coming out this fall called Sig. So it is a historical fiction Filipino martial arts graphic novel that was assembled together by Christian Kabuay, who is an artist here in the Bay Area. So Sig is a warrior in training in pre-colonial Philippines who, like I said, is working to become a warrior, but she's not really sure why. Like, she doesn't understand what her motive is for why she wants to do this. And that's something she's having to figure out. And then invaders from an unknown land are threatening to take over. So when her Datu, or chief, for those who don't know, is assembling their allies to get ready for battle. She has to figure out, like, is her focus and her heart, are they in the right place to where she'd be able to focus with the battle coming ahead. So that's kind of like a rundown of what it's about. Yeah, like I said, it should be coming out this fall in October, I believe. We don't have a date yet, but I think that should be finalized pretty soon. Actually, just a couple of hours ago, I was looking over the latest draft of the graphic novel, and I think we're getting close to being done with it finally.
That's exciting. How has the
Thank
experience
you.
been for you writing a comic book?
It's been interesting. Like, it's so funny. Like, when the idea was first pitched, and a lot of people don't know this, it was originally pitched as a short film, but Christian didn't realize at the time that to make an animated anything takes years, and we have no chill. So he approached me a year and a half ago saying, "Hey, what do you think about turning into a graphic novel?" And I said, "Yeah, I love that idea." And I say it's so funny because, like, right before then, I had been a consultant on one of the Lumpy with the Vengeance comics. Um, and then a little bit after that, I collaborated with a friend of mine on a web comic that kind of explored my experience with keeping journals growing up. And so then when I got approached with suddenly becoming the writer for a graphic novel, I feel like, yeah, this is like the natural next step in this process. It's so weird because, like, I never, even though I consider myself a nerd and a geek, I had never entertained the idea of pursuing comics writing. And my parents both grew up with comic books too, so that makes it even weirder for me to be like, how come I never thought of, pursuing this particular medium of writing? So now that I'm in this boat, I'm been really enjoying the experience of learning, and I hope that this won't be the last time. In fact, I know for a fact that it won't be the last time, but I'm not going to
That's
say
awesome.
more about that.
That's very cool. I mean, to take it back even further from the origins of the Nerds of Color, as I mentioned with Jason, we collaborated on the first Secret Identities book back in 2000. I mean, the book came out in 2009, but we started working on it in 2006 and that's when, we met. And, we were talking about everything that's changed in the last 10 years when the Nerds of Color came out. I mean, the amount of Asian American comic book writers and artists have ballooned since Secret Identities came out. And not even just that, but then one of the reasons we did Secret Identities was that, like, even back in the late 2000s, there were plenty of Asian American writers and Asian American artists, but there weren't any Asian American superhero stories or just comic stories in general, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, again, it's gotten to the point where, like, DC did their own, Secret Identities anthology a couple years ago, where they had Asian American writers and artists, highlight all the Asian American superheroes in the DC universe. And it's just like, and it would be nice to get a shout out, DC, but whatever. I'm not salty. But
speaking of Secret Identities, I have a question. Have you ever thought about doing a third anthology?
Doing what?
Doing a third anthology of Secret Identities?
Well, no, sorry. There was a, like, semi third book. There was a book that we did, Jeff and I did, with the George Takei exhibit at the Japanese American Museum in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that wasn't technically a Secret Identities book. I think at this point I don't see another book on the horizon. Jeff has moved on to greener pastures with other types of writing, but
I remember after the second book, Jeff did mention the idea of doing something aimed at kids.
Kids, yeah, that was the idea. That was like the germ of the idea. But I think at this point I don't think any, at least of the original. I don't want to speak for Jeff Perry and Perry Shen and Jerry Ma, the other two editors of Secret Identities, but I don't see it in the cards, unfortunately, that we would revisit the Secret Identities universe. Aside from, shout out, it was the #1 watched animated series on Netflix recently, Mech Cadet U, or whatever it's called on Netflix.
Yeah, Greg Pak's series.
Greg Pak's comic book series that originated in Shattered, the second Secret Identities. So that's the first Secret Identities anything that actually went on to be a real thing. So shout out to Mech Cadets on Netflix. That was
great. There you go. Graphic novel to animation just takes time.
Yeah, just takes a while. It takes a while. So maybe to your point, when we saw this whole strike thing, we'll see a Dustig animated series.
Yeah. And you say there won't be a third volume. I'm sure that's what they said about making a second Maverick movie or the fourth Matrix movie. So I think
Yeah, when we're 60, maybe we'll revisit and
making circles in the
I'll do the Michael Keaton as Batman.
Yeah, I mean, I just meant weirder things have happened.
No, it's absolutely true. Absolutely true. Dominic, what has been nerd popping for you over these last several? It's been a while since we've seen each other.
Oh yeah, it's so nice to see everybody. And I just wanted to, tag on to a few things that people said. I think Mary Sue is a great template. Mary Sue, they've got great writers and they engage pop culture and they funny and yet, they raise good questions. And also, yeah, it was nice of Shawn to have a cameo appearance, and his presence is definitely felt whether or not he's here in the field of advocacy and progressive pop culture topics. But anyway, what's I don't know. I'm wearing this ridiculous shirt which doesn't fit me very well, but it just I think it actually came at one point. I got him from Salvation Army in LA. But I believe it came from the writer's room of one of those Superman series. Which one? I don't know. I don't know if it was Lois and Clark or Smallville or I don't know. But anyway, but it was just on my mind because I saw that Flash movie, which is on Max now. And I missed the podcast where you were talking about it. So I read in passing. I don't know what the general feeling about it was. But aside from all the other shit, I'll say I really like that Supergirl part. This Supergirl part works for me. Yeah. I like that she brought this goth anger to it. And you know how Superman's problem is he's never really in danger. It's hard to root for him because he's doesn't have that nothing can hurt him generally. But I just like the part, and I'm saying this, I didn't enjoy
anything else.
Main sections of the Flash, including the performance of the lead. But when they got the Supergirl part, it's oh yeah, she's in danger. She's in the Red Sun prison and stuff. It gives her this whole poignant arc, and then she comes out with this very sort of dark anger. And I don't know, it just totally worked for me. And I also wanted to add her hair. I don't know, is this a weird thing to be talking about? But I like the illusion of her just in her hair, because it was it was atypical for there to be the Supergirl who was not blonde and Melissa Benoist looking. That was sort of a new trick. But because they have the dark hair with this sort of wavy things, it sort of evokes Superman Prime, right? I don't know if you bring up that point when you were talking.
I mean, I think that was intended, because they grafted the Superman story from Flashpoint onto Supergirl in the movie, right. Because in the original Flashpoint comic, of course, it's Clark that's emaciated because he's kept away from the yellow sun. And I think they purposefully cast Sasha Calle, and not just cast her, but made her not wear a blonde wig or dye her hair blonde, because they wanted to evoke Kal-El. When you first, and even in the trailers, when you see her from behind and you just see the black hair, you think it's Clark. It's it's
dark wavy hair and the little ringlets, and I thought that was great. And then it gets that terrible part at the end where you have to it's becomes a super snuff film where you just watch her get her killed 10 times, and that part was terrible. Just saying, there was a part in the middle that I was really
I mean,
part.
The same way you will about the middle act of the Flash is still my favorite part. I'm here for the Michael Keaton Batman stuff too, and that it's a shame that Sasha Calle will never be Supergirl again, because nothing from that film is going to survive the
never say never, but
DC reboot. I don't think anyone wants anything to do with the Flash movie.
Well, okay, but it's even as as nerds of color who we interrogate things, even movies that are not on the surface popular, we get to look like Birds of Prey. We get to look at them and see little things that they did. And again, taking parts of the Flash, not as a whole movie, but taking parts of it, they did quite a few things. Again, there's a lot more Latin American rooted cast members than there were before. It's written by Christina Hodson, and if I may, it does even where it like it's a little janky, like it gets to like human connection interest stuff more than the Snyder films ever did, you know, more than this. That's like the Snyder versus Big Prom is like he sort of just doesn't know about like human interaction somehow. You know what I'm saying? And so when it sneaks out in things like, you know, like I don't know, it was kind of a corny scene, but just like, you know, but the way you meet up with your mom in the supermarkets. And,
oh yeah, I mean, it was a very affecting. I mean, and speaking, you mentioned her earlier, Maribel Verdú, who's a Spanish actress, so she's a European.
Yes, she's
Latin,
Spanish,
not a Latin American Latin. But what a year for the alumni of Y Tu Mama Tambien, right? Like she was in The Flash. You had Diego Luna in Andor, and you had Gael Garcia Bernal in Werewolf by Night. They've just like taken the superhero and Star Wars universe by storm.
Yeah, totally. And Andor was definitely one of the best things that came out this year.
Yeah.
The jury's still out about Ahsoka. I'd be curious to know what you thought, if you had thoughts about it. But
I do have thoughts, but I know Lauren's a fan, so I don't want to.
Okay. Well, you could.
Anyway. Here's my point about the live action Filoniverse writ large, not just about Ahsoka. But I just want to know, what is the criteria for voice actors to reprise their animated role in live action?
You think there's criteria?
Well, because I'm like, either you should let all of them do it or let none of them do it. Because like, why Katie Sackhoff, Clancy Brown, and the Mickelson brother who's playing Thrawn get to play their animated characters in live action? And really, I'm more like salty just about Tia Serkar not being Sabine. That's all. That's like, I get Rosario Dawson's a bigger name than Ashley Eckstein, and you know, she was fan cast, so I'm not salty about like live action actors taking over roles from animated, you know, voice actors. Like that happens all the time. In fact, like a lot of the Clone Wars actors were cast because Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen didn't want to do like voice acting. But I don't know. I mean, Natasha Liu Bordizzo's fine, but like there's a scene in episode 2 of Ahsoka that's shot for shot remake of the last scene of Rebels.
Okay.
And it just doesn't work to me without Tia Serkar. But I'm again.
Okay. Well,
sorry, sorry, you got me on the
I don't know if this is one of the issues that will be brought up in contract negotiation for the actors union, but I don't think they have any rule about like
no, but I'm just
acting.
Like
voice acting doesn't guarantee you shit as far as the live
action and it shouldn't. But I'm just wondering like why does Katie Sackhoff get to play Bo-Katan in animation and live action, but Tia Serkar can't play Sabine?
Well, Katie Sackhoff's already a known quantity on screen. But
I mean, but I get that, and Tia Serkar is also an on-screen actor. I mean, I did a whole post on the Nerds of Color about like why Tia Serkar is a. Anyway, so that's my thoughts on Ahsoka.
Okay, a little saltiness,
a little bit salty, but it is what it is. Jason Sperber, what's been nerd popping for you, my friend?
Well, in our house we just. Been binging a lot of Star Trek. My Whovian daughter, after the end of 13's run, she was a big 13 and Yaz shipper. And so after that, we needed something else. And so she finally agreed to watch some Star Trek after actually Laura sent the two of us to Star Trek Day last year to cover for the site, and that sort of nudged her a little bit, and so we've been binging. She's a big Lower Decks and Strange New Worlds fan, and so now I'm
you should have your daughter do a follow-up TikTok or Instagram reel, because one of the few YouTube shorts / Instagram reels we've ever posted was you talking to Will Wheaton about why your daughter doesn't like Star Trek. So like, I think that's a good opportunity for the follow-up. Maybe we even get, I mean, of course he's on strike, but once the strike is over, we can get Will on the horn perhaps. And Although I guess they really did bank a bunch of Ready Room episodes on YouTube because that shit's still coming out. And it's like, you know, I guess they were preparing ahead of time. So for me, I'll just say briefly, it's not necessarily, you know, movie, TV, or video game related, but I have been super into this Japanese pop group recently called Atarashi Gakko. They were one of the, I wouldn't say headliners, but they were one of the performers at Head in the Clouds, which is the 88 Rising Music Festival in Los Angeles last month. And they're going on tour, their first North American tour in the fall. And we're going to go see them when they come to DC. And they've been around for a few years now. They, like, you may or may not have seen them. Like, their shtick is they wear schoolgirl uniforms, but then they're very unique. They're not like, you know, stereotypical J-pop kind of artists, even like a K-pop artist. Like they have very intricate synchronized dancing, but it's not the kind of like K-pop dancing. You know what I mean? They're a really cool band. You should check them out. They just released a new EP, and like I said, they're going on a North American tour, and they're really cool. And that's been the main thing. Like my entire household has been into for the last few months. And I mean, speaking of TikTok, they came to prominence because they're like the biggest Japanese group on TikTok right now. So that's what I'm nerd popping about. And I want to thank Lauren, Jason, Dominic, and Shawn for 3 seconds for swinging by and reminiscing about the last 10 years of Nerds of Color. Maybe there'll be 10 more, maybe not. I don't know. Like I can only do so much. I'm tired. I'm tired is all I'm saying. But
it's exhausting always rooting for the anti-hero. I mean,
yeah,
that's one thing I feel.
It's exhausting when your favorite voice actors don't get to play their live action counterpart, and you can't rage about it.
But just the fact that you remember it and the sentimentality makes you feel that way. I don't know. I think that suggests there will be something to push towards 10 more years. Because
I think
this frustration and expectation loop is going to keep happening, which is
to your point, Dominic.
Experience.
Like when I was talking about like what
nerds covering the thing,
what content. I mean, some of the most consistent content. We didn't really talk about the podcast itself, but the podcast itself has evolved over the last 10 years, right? Because we started off as like we were innovators because this shit we're doing right now, we were doing this 10 years ago. Before Zoom existed, we were holding Zoom calls and broadcasting them on the internet. And like back in 2013, 2014, it was just like, does this like even make sense to people? Like, do people know would people want to watch a web conference on YouTube? And then, you know, thanks to Corona, like that's what all YouTube content was for like 3 years. It's just Zoom calls on YouTube. So shout out to Nelson Wong. I wanted the AA Rising's progenitor for being the director of Hard NOC Life way back in the day. Also, shout out to some of the original contributors to the Nerds of Color. You know, Jason mentioned a bunch of them. Sean Taylor was one of the originals. Jen Fong of Reappropriate was one of the originals. And, you know, some of the people I turned to be like, hey, you guys have websites. How do you do that? I think I found the original email thread with like you and Phil Yu and Jen Fong was just like, how do you guys run a website? And I think the first version was on Blogspot before we like to WordPress or something, right? So it was like, does Blogspot even exist anymore? I don't know.
Yeah,
anyway,
I mean, it's mainly about WordPress, but like you're not alone there. Like that's how lots of blogs.
Yeah. I mean, we're
successful start.
We are,
go on to this day.
Yeah, it predated like Squarespace and all that stuff. Anyway, how can the people listening and watching find you guys? Are there still places to find you on the internet? Because I know that the main place is somewhere none of us want to be anymore. So let's start with you, Lauren. How can people find you and your work on the internet?
Yeah, I should mention I'm recovering from a cold recently, so
it's a good thing we're on Zoom. I hope you feel better.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, you can still find me. I mean, I guess you could find me on the place formerly known as Twitter, but I'm not really on there anymore, so whatever. But I am on Instagram, and it's very active. And I recently joined, well, maybe not so recently, but I'm on Threads now, and I'm still slowly trying to get adjusted to it. So if more people can congregate on there, then I'd be more compelled to try and be more active on there.
What's your handle?
And yeah, and there's, oh, yeah, my handle is Echo Lauren Lola. And then there's also my website, lolabythebay.wordpress.com. I am on hiatus from it currently because I found out the other month that there is AI scraping going on Google and WordPress. So I'm just trying to figure out the right protections for it to protect my stuff before I can resume writing on there regularly. But yeah, everything's on there. Everything, I keep it up to date on all that I have going on. And yeah, just check all that out, and also check out the Nerds of Color.
Absolutely. Jason, how can people find you and your presence on the internet, if at all?
Yeah, I know. I'm on Instagram, but I don't post a lot. I don't know. I mean, and you've heard me say that I should be writing for the site more for 10 years. So I'll just say it again. So, cross your fingers.
Hey, who knows? Look, you may be the parent of our social media manager pretty soon. It sounds like that's what I'm hearing.
Hey, that sounds good to me.
Dominic, how can people find you on the internet?
Oh, I'm at Doma, DOMMAH on Instagram and Blue Sky. I took a break from social media, blah blah blah, everything for a while. I'm sort of getting back into it. I'm gonna try the Blue Sky, and most places I end up getting Dama as a handle anyway. So
how was Blue Sky, by the way? No one's ever given me an invite, so I have no idea what that's.
I'll give you one if you want, and I can
build out
the Nerds of Color presence there if we want to get off the freaking Twitter thing before. Well, whatever. It's already totally sank into the sea, whatever, exploded into Titanic, supernova, whatever metaphor I want to use there. Point is, and also I have a YouTube channel at Melancholy Ball, like a sad ball game. But yeah, and I'll totally help build out the Nerds of Color presence on.
Absolutely. I mean, Blue Sky's. I mean, it's
because
battle between Blue Sky and Threads, right? Like that's one of those
like
is
that.
going to
Jets versus
merge.
Sharks. But here's our perfect chance. Like we didn't exactly outlive Twitter. I mean, they were around, but we Nerds of Color is past the end of Twitter. But now there are all these other sites. Maybe we'll live through the entire lifespan of one of these alternate microblogging.
Well, I mean, the very first post I mentioned earlier in the podcast when I was like, I just created a Twitter account and we have 9 followers already. Wow. You know what I mean? It was like, I haven't even posted anything on this Twitter thing and I have 9 followers. So
we did outlast the platform we launched Hard NOC Life on.
The Google Hangouts. that doesn't exist anymore.
I thought you could still use a Google Hangouts if you wanted to.
They're called Google Meets now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And
you're
it's
right.
not
You're absolutely right.
It's not the same thing. Because I remember getting the emails like Google Hangouts doesn't exist anymore. Or what was Google had its own social media thing?
Google Plus?
Google Plus.
Buzz, Wave. All of those were now we're getting really weirdly nostalgic.
I mean, I think we still have our Tumblr, and I think our posts still automatically post to Tumblr. But I don't think I've looked at our Tumblr in a long. I do think I think when Jamal Michelle was still with the Nerds of Color, who went on to work for the NPR, talking about how people springboarded from the Nerds of Color. He created our Twitch channel, and I think he created a TikTok channel, but I don't think there's any content on it. So
yeah,
it might exist for Lucy to
We're gonna do more video games. That's one thing that we'll do. That was.
I mean, we have. I think you have. Don't you have access to the Twitch channel? Someone's got access to the Twitch.
Yeah, I mean, someone could be compelled to do more video game content if one had the,
wherewithal,
motivation.
That's
pat on the back. Go ahead, you do that, Dominic. Kind of,
Go ahead, Dominic. It's all yours.
Yeah, thanks.
And I'm sure I still get emails about please review this game, and I'm like, who? Anyway. You can find me on Instagram at Real Keith Chow, as well as Threads. And you can find the Nerds of Color at the Nerds of Color on all platforms, even the one formerly known as Twitter for now. Follow us on all those platforms. Go to hardknockmedia.com to find the podcast. Go to our YouTube channel if you're probably watching this already, and subscribe if you aren't already. Hit the notification bell so you will get alerts of more awesome Nerds of Color content on YouTube. And buy our merch. Again, I may put the retro Nerds of Color shirt on TeePublic for a limited time at teepublic.com, and just search for the Nerds of Color. And you can become a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/the Nerds of Color. We may open up our Discord for Patreon supporters, so that's another possible incentive to be a supporter there. Anyway, what a ride. It's been 10 years, and until the next 10.
Shawn Taylor, love you wherever you are. Hope the phone problem gets worked out.
Thanks for stopping by, Shawn. We love you.
Boys, professional artists and professors. Maybe a nerd who's just like you, talking about the things that you like too. So I invite you to the NOC. In full color, you see me. The Hard NOC Life. Comics, movies, and TV. Yeah. Pop culture with a different perspective. Watch it on your screen, hit play, so check this.